Welcome to episode 37 of Tahrir Podcast. It is the 1st of April 2024, and today's episode is about the war in Gaza. This is the second episode on Israel-Palestine, and the first one being episode 32 with Palestinian journalist Hind Qudari, who joined me from Gaza in the first interview to break the communications blackout in late October 2023. So far, it has been translated into multiple languages and even made it to print. It has now been more than 170 days of war. Thousands of women and children have been indiscriminately bombed to death. All universities in Gaza have now been destroyed, and Gaza is on the verge of famine, or is already going through it, as tens of people die from malnutrition and thirst, as Israel keeps blocking aid from going in. Joins me in this episode is Palestinian political analyst Khalil Sayegh to try to make sense of the situation on the ground and what the future might look like. Welcome to Tahrir Podcast, Khalil.
Thank you, Abdullah. I really appreciate you having me and appreciate the opportunity to talk during this very, very dire time for us, the Palestinians, and I would argue, for the rest of the Arab world as well.
Definitely. So first of all, you yourself are from Gaza. So why don't we start by talking about the Gaza you grew up in and the one that you remember? How was growing up in Gaza like?
Yeah, so I am from Gaza, and I do have a love-hate relationship with Gaza, right? I mean, I am from Gaza, but I'm not originally from Gaza because my family came to Gaza in 1948. So my family were ethnically cleansed in 1948 when the state of Israel was created. In the event that we, the Palestinians, call as Nakba. Born into Gaza, to be born as a refugee, means that you are born with all these sort of institutional challenges that face you economically and socially, etc., because of the structure that has been built with the occupation and the system segregation that Israel has created there. And in the occupation, I was hit the fact that I lived in Gaza and under this siege, under this discrimination that I live under, and thus my subconscious have hated Gaza itself. On the other hand, also I've hated the different authoritarian government that have managed Gaza, from the Palestinian Authority to Hamas to others. However, leaving Gaza, moved to the West Bank and then now in Washington, D.C., seeing your city being, realize how much you actually have loved this, how much you loved the streets of it, the beach, the people, obviously, that have lived in this city. It's really quite hard having to think and analyze objectively and rationally what is going on in that conflict at a time when you have to count also all the memories you've had there, the bad and the good ones. You have to think of all the friends. I lost a lot of friends during this war, really close friends of mine. My best friend was killed. Also, my father was killed in Gaza during this war. And I have to go through it as well when my family is still stuck in the northern part of Gaza Strip. And unfortunate reality is that there is an actual famine in the north as well. So that's my experience with Gaza.
Condolences to your father. May he rest in peace. I didn't know about that.
Take care, Bella.
So when was the last time you made contact with someone in Gaza? And how was that like?
With someone in Gaza, I think yesterday or the day before, I tried to stay in touch with anyone who I can be in touch with in Gaza as much as I can. But with my family, it has been almost a week because the internet is back and forth. It's that easy really to be in touch with someone in Gaza. But the way we do things is like if you're able to communicate with one person there, then this person tries to give you up-to-date news on everyone that you know, especially the family, etc. But overall, communication is very hard. And I would say now it's not impossible that it used to be before. Not because the situation has gotten better, though, but because people have been able to develop technology, or not even technology, just like different ways to go around the blockade and around the siege, to have internet or have to have telecom communication, etc. And some of whom has why we have still been able to be in touch with the north of Gaza at a time when it's completely under siege.
And so before we get into the specifics of the current aggression, could you put into perspective the different types of legal status of Palestinians, be they from the West Bank, Gaza, or Jerusalem, as well as your experience navigating that?
Yeah, the best way of explaining the apartheid system that Israel has established is that you've got different class of people. At the very top, Ashkenazi Jews, and at the very bottom, the people of Gaza, the Palestinians in Gaza. And in the middle, you've got the others. Then you've got, obviously, the Eastern Jews, or Mizrahim Jews. Then you've got the Palestinian citizens then you've got maybe the Druze and other minorities within Israel who are Arabs. Then you've got the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Then you get Jerusalemites. Then you get the West Bankers, and then you get Gazans. Gazans at the very bottom. To the Israelis, even in the last 20 years, to say to someone, go to hell, in the language. In Hebrew, they say, Lech le'Aza, means go to Gaza. That's literally. So they understand that they have created a prison, they created a hell, and that they tell you, go to hell or go to Gaza. Why this distinguish is important in this apartheid situation that we live in. And why it's important to understand it, because the legality of where your address is in Palestine determine how much opportunity you can have, obviously how much food and resources in Gaza will be accessible, etc. But let's assume you moved from Gaza, which was my case. I moved from Gaza to the West Bank. All of a sudden, because your address is Gaza, you find yourself under the threat, the constant threat of the violence of the soldiers, under the constant threat of being deported back to Gaza, despite that it's not safe or whatever. But you're under threat of being sent back to Gaza. I myself was not sent back to Gaza, but let me tell you that more than 15 times I was stopped by Israeli soldiers at checkpoints in the West Bank, and I was beaten up. Even as a child, I was 17 or 18. Why I was beaten up, why I was being stopped? Only because my ID says that I am originally from Gaza. And a few times I was under the threat of being deported. I left Palestine, I left the West Bank in 2021 to come here to the West, to Washington, D.C. to receive my master's. And I finished my master's, wanted to go back to Palestine. I was shocked that after living 10 years in the West Bank, the Israeli occupation would not let me back to the West Bank, and they want me to go to Gaza. So that's another element of it. You don't have a freedom of movement even within Palestine to go from a place to another. The ones from Gaza cannot go and live in the West Bank, and one from the West Bank cannot go and live in Gaza. Let me even tell you more details. After October 7th, if you are like me from Gaza and you have in your ID Gaza, and you're in the West Bank today, without any reason, without any justification, the Israeli army will arrest you. Not only that, but put you in a very specific prison today in Israel that is specified for the Gazans. A prison where there's torture, a prison where there is food and water, and it's really, really, really a difficult situation. And one can describe this as taking hostages. It's not really a prison system, but it's rather kidnapping and taking hostages for people.
And how would you describe the situation in Gaza right now?
I think there's a reality in which there is two types of death you can get in Gaza. The one death, which is that Israel would directly kill you through bombing or shooting, which is what we have been seeing in the last few days in the raid on the Shifa hospital and the raid of Gaza. Also the bombardment of Deir al-Balah, the bombardments of Rafah in the south and Khan Yunis as well. There has been bombardments. And there is a second type of death, which is a slow death. You would die through starvation, through the famine, or through the lack of medicine that is not allowed to access there. Or you will die because the hospitals has been destroyed or shut down completely by the Israeli forces as well. So one can say that Gaza have moved from the place that it used to be before October 7th, which Gaza, by the way, was an open prison before October 7th, to a slaughterhouse that is today. A slaughterhouse that you could be either slaughtered by the direct action of the occupation, which is the killing, or you could die by the lack of actions of the occupation, which is not allow food and medicine to get into Gaza. But on both sides, on the both hands, it is a slow death for the scholars and legal scholars have described what's happening in Gaza as genocide.
And how important is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, the UNRWA, to Gazans? And what do you expect would happen soon now that much of its funding has been cut off?
I think the work of UNRWA is very important for Gaza. It has been always important, but it's in particular important when Israel has completely defeated all the infrastructures of other institutions who could play a part. Let's say any Palestinian institution will have been head of school in 2001. There has been complete devastation and destruction for them, for their infrastructure, for their ability to distribute food or aid or whatever. So who are you left with? The UNRWA. UNRWA is the only institution that has the capabilities of over 12,000 employees who work in Gaza, who can distribute the aid, etc. So by cutting them, you are giving death sentence to the Palestinians in terms of aids, etc. The second thing that Israel is thinking of as they're cutting the UNRWA funding, the Israelis are under the illusion, and it's been constant illusion, by the way, since 48 until today, that if we defund and we destroy UNRWA, we will destroy the idea of right of return, as if the Palestinian people right of return and if the Palestinian people's status of refugee, that they convince themselves this way, it comes from UNRWA, but that is not true. Matter of fact, the definition of refugee under UN refugee status and the definition of refugee under UNRWA, it's just the same. A Syrian kid who was born in Jordan, who is a refugee there, still inherit the status of refugee, but the Israelis somehow are convincing themselves and convinced the US, by the way, convinced Congress, that, oh, UNRWA is the problem because it gives the Palestinians the status of refugee. But guess what? That's a status that in other cases as well, they're giving without their own UNRWA.
And in the background as well, Israel has also been attacking the West Bank, which is far from Gaza and Hamas rule, and driving out more Palestinians over there every day in order to build illegal settlements in the process. Not to mention detaining thousands without trial, as you just briefly mentioned. So how do you view what's happening there?
Israel has been committing gradual ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. There is no question on that. And as I explained, this is done through permits of regimes, regime of permits, through allowing who gets in and who not, through the demography. If you are from the West Bank, for example, and you married an Egyptian woman, you cannot bring her to the West Bank. So one would wonder if Israel is interested in any type of two-state solution or any type of solution, why are they really fascinated with the demography of the West Bank even? Why are you trying to control literally who you get to marry? On the other hand, also a system of granting permits to build or not to build in Area C, the expansion of Israeli settlements, etc. And there is also a natural resistance in the West Bank to these colonial policies, some of which is violent and some of which also like funded by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, who I by no means like or think they're a good actor or whatever. But the people, the grievances that is produced by the Israeli colonial policies produce a certain feeling among people that makes them recruitment to Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other actors. That's the reality there. It's been increasing, especially since this government has came to power. They have made two promises that are very clear to their constituency. One, we will expand the settlements. And the second, that we will not recognize a Palestinian state or allow it to exist. But not only that, they went even a step further. We will not even recognize the Palestinian people themselves. The Israeli government that is in power today does not consider us Palestinians, consider us only Arabin, as they say it in Hebrew. And why do they say that? It's very crucial and important to understand it, because in their subconscious and in their way of thinking, these are just Arabs. They can go to all these states that exist. They can go to Egypt, they can go to Jordan, to wherever. So they don't see us. And in Smotrich's plan, who is the finance minister, and by the way, he's the de facto ruler of the West Bank, have stated the following in one of his famous plans called Decisive Plans, is that Arabs will have two options, and by Arabs he refers to the Palestinians. We will conquer the land, take all over the West Bank, make it one state reality, and you have two options. You would either accept the apartheid regime and accept the Jewish supremacy, that you are less of a human, literally, or a second state, not even a citizen, but you don't have rights to vote or whatever, and you would accept the Jewish state, as he says, or you will be asked to leave, or you'll be killed, or whatever. That is the mentality of the people who are in the Israeli government today. That's the reality there. Obviously, too, there is all sort of domestic issues that are taking place. Hamas does have interest in making unrest in the West Bank. Hamas does have an interest in exporting what's happening in Gaza to the West Bank, because Hamas has been all time about who gets to rule over the Palestinians, who gets to lead the Palestinian Liberation Movement. And I think Hamas obviously want to see the PLO come to end, or not at least come to end. They want to dominate the PLO, and they want to see the Palestinian Authority coming to end. All these things are playing at the same time, but the most important context to not really be distracted with all these domestic politics issues is the overarching policies of the colonial power that exists there, which is the state of Israel.
So if the IDF goes into Rafah, where more than 1 million Gazans are currently displaced on the border with Egypt, how and what would that look like?
Yeah, sure, Abdullah. I think it depends on what and how the Israelis will conduct this operation. If they do it as BP wants and as Israel wanted, just similar operation to the one that will happen to the north, it will be impossible to control the border. It will be impossible to contain Palestinians from running into the Egyptian borders. And I don't see the Egyptians trying to prevent them by killing them, because that's the only way of enforcing border. If you don't want people to come, you try to enforce it through certain violence, right? And I don't think the Egyptian government or regime is interested in doing such a thing. On the other hand, there's all these theories and conspiracy theories that, the Egyptians want the Palestinians to move to Sinai, etc. I don't think Egypt is interested in that whatsoever. However, I think the Egyptians have realized months ago that once the attack happens on Rafah, there will be hundreds of thousands leaving or running to the borders, and thus they built small facility that is surrounded by walls to allow a few thousands of Palestinians, or like maybe 150,000. That's the estimation that the Egyptians are giving to move there. Now, if they move on a more limited operation, such as what America wanted the Israelis to do, it's not like it would be, lead operation, surgical, and there would be no civilian casualties. Again, this is a very, very, very dense area. There will be civilian casualties, etc., but there will be less likelihood for hundreds of thousands of people running into the Egyptian border.
And how do you assess the media coverage of the conflict, both within the region and internationally? Are there any significant narratives or perspectives that you believe are being overlooked or misrepresented?
I do think that the Western media is quite biased toward the Palestinians. I do think that there is a narrative that's been pushed since October 7th, that this is just came out of the nowhere, that there were no, as if there is no context of really systematic discrimination and an apartheid system imposed on the Palestinians after there is no occupation and there is no violence that have predated October 7th. That is a problem in the Western media. But at the same time, we start seeing breaking through in some Western medias, not enough, not nearly as we want it to be. I think the only really TV channel that has been covering this intensively in English has been Al Jazeera in English, and they've been doing a great job, I think, at doing it. On Arabic, things are different. There's all sort of media channels, but obviously the most watched media channel in the Middle East and the one that everyone listens to has been Al Jazeera Arabic. And unlike Jazeera English, who are doing a really great job, I think Al Jazeera and Arabic are doing a lot of, from my point of view, destructive coverage as well as good coverage. They're doing good coverage when it comes to atrocities, etc., but destructive in the sense of really championing the emotions that people want to hear, more of a populist coverage where, resistance, they're winning, they're whatever. That's not really based on facts. I think maybe you could say by guerrilla fighters not being completely wiped off, they're winning, but there is not really winning in Gaza. The matter of the fact that there is a genocidal attack on Gaza, people are being slaughtered, people are being killed. The second thing is that, as far as I'm concerned, and that's my opinion, people disagree with that, I do see Al Jazeera glorifying Hamas in a way that is dangerous. I mean, obviously, the Palestinians have right to armed resistance within the limit of international humanitarian law as well, which does not include targeting civilians. But on the other hand, Hamas is not your ideal group. I mean, they're Islamists. They have a particular Islamist agenda. They have a particular interest with the way they're working with Iran, etc. So I don't think if amplifying Hamas to be just the heroes is the most helpful. Now, one can be as much supportive of resistance as he wants, as much supportive of Palestinian right to determination, etc., but can still be critical of certain elements of what Hamas is doing, especially that one cannot see what's happening in Gaza and think, oh, the idea of what started on October 7 was a good idea, even apart from the moral calculation of what happened on October 7 itself. To think that today what's happening is leading us toward one step closer to liberation, I'm not really sure about it. We are less 33,000 people, and most likely for the next 10 years, Gaza will be uninhabitable. A lot of people would leave. No universities, no healthcare system, etc. So I cannot think that this is a completely positive thing, and I have to think more critically about it. And unfortunately, I don't see it. Unfortunately, I don't see Al Jazeera Arabic doing this.
And if a ceasefire deal is reached, say tomorrow, how would that look like for Gazans, considering the strip has effectively been cut into two parts, with, as you briefly put minutes ago, all infrastructure is now almost gone, including universities, services, most importantly, healthcare, which is the most vital and which has been severely hit and affected. And if that is overcome, which is so far realistically the biggest hurdle, the question of legitimacy is one that would be on the table. So as a student of democratization in the region, what do you have to say on that? If there would be a democratic and transparent process, who would be leading it? And who do you think would come on top?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here, right? I mean, to start with, I don't see that a ceasefire under the conditions of what Hamas wants would happen, which is Hamas wants a complete withdrawal, like sort of return to pre-October 7th situation. They want the Hamas to rerun the show, but the Israel withdrawal. The Israelis are saying, no, the max we can offer is 6 weeks ceasefire. So when you say ceasefire, I mean, I can't help but wonder which one they're referring to, right? The permanent one as Hamas wants, or you're talking about 6 weeks ceasefire. Now, if we were talking about permanent one, obviously we need a permanent ceasefire, but it's not even enough. We need to open the borders completely, and we need a massive project of reconstruction. Even before we talk about the democratization, before we talk about transition of power during this period, what we need is focusing on experts that need to run the reconstruction, even apart from the government, maybe private institutions, maybe civil society has to step down. I don't think the politicians have led us to this disasters, and I don't think they can be part of the solution of the reconstruction. This is step one. If the ceasefire is 6 weeks, I think in the 6 weeks, what will happen is that as much aid will get into Gaza as possible, as much people who can leave will leave, and then the war will come back, and it will be a disaster. That's what the Americans and the Israelis want 6 weeks ceasefire. That wouldn't be helpful to anyone. Now, in terms of legitimacy, what we are seeing from surveys is quite interesting, because Hamas's popularity went up to the sky right after October 7th, especially in the West Bank. In Gaza, it was like really gray area, like there is popularity, but it's decreased since before. Right now, we are seeing that also Hamas's popularity still decreases, started to decrease in the West Bank, because the people start seeing that this is not really leading anywhere. In Gaza, it's still somewhere in the middle. Now, the question is at the time when Hamas's popularity decreased relatively, it's still the most popular, but decreased relatively, there is no an alternative that is gaining the momentum. Fatah has a lot of support in Gaza, interestingly, but does not have any support in the West Bank. So the way the electoral system would work, still Hamas would win because Hamas has more, both Gaza and the West Bank. But all the surveys show that if Marwan Barghouti comes to lead Fatah, who's the Palestinian Palestinian Fatah member, executive committee member, and he's in the Israeli jail, if he's released, he runs to presidential election, he would win anyway, and that would be give certain legitimacy to Fatah, etc. I do think that if democratization process would have to work in Palestine, it would start by Fatah rebuilding itself to provide itself as an alternative to Hamas. Not only because Hamas are bad or I disagree with them politically, not because of that, but because any democracy has to have two political systems. Any democracies have to have two political parties at least, right, that compete with each other. If there is a transition where there is only one political party that is capable of mobilizing people, I do think that trajectory of a failed transition is more likely. And I think the Egyptian example is a good example. The Islamists were the only political party that is capable of mobilizing. And thus, the more secular parties and the more secular elites who felt that they cannot mobilize themselves as much as good as the Islamists had to resort to some undemocratic means of, getting some backs with the army, the military in Egypt, etc. While if you look at Tunisia, you see that the secular parties were able to mobilize after the Islamist won and established, Nida Tunis party, etc. And when you look actually at Nida Tunis, what it is, it's actually some sort of group of elites who were inherited ability to mobilize from two ways. One, the old party, of Neo Dastur, Hizb Dasturi, and the others through the unions, labor unions, etc. So they were able to mobilize, and thus they were able to hold some sort of democracy. Now, obviously, Tunisia has regressed to autocracy, whatever. I think the Palestinian case would be a good democratized case because we have a strong civil society and we have two strong parties. Now, some elements of undemocratic culture in both parties, Hamas and Fatah. But to an extent, if Fatah is able to increase its support again, which can happen quickly, by the way, because they're in general they're more supporters of Fatah than Hamas in Palestine overall, despite that change. I think when Fatah and Hamas are able to compete with each other democratically, that would be the best democratic outcome, because both have to make compromise. Unless we both make the same compromises that the Tunisians were able to make in terms of what we want, what we don't want, I'm afraid that we will remain in this vicious circle of division that the Palestinians are at this point.
But to put it into perspective, could you bring into light how Hamas came to power in Gaza in the first place, 2005, 2006?
For sure. I mean, Hamas won the election in 2006. Funny enough, Hamas won the election overall, but they won one governor of Gaza, Hafada. They won one and lost the rest. And in the West Bank, they won majority of them, obviously. But the way the electoral system works is that they got both the West Bank and Gaza. Now, as in any democratic system, when you win an election, you're supposed to take government. Period, right? You have your own government, etc. Hamas were able to do that. Matter of fact, Abbas gave them all the authority to do it. But what happened is, with the American intervention and European intervention, that rejected Hamas's win and results, and they imposed sanctions, etc. Hamas was not able to run a government that completely depended on foreign aid, etc., which was stopped, and the salaries weren't being paid, etc. So Hamas were forced to make what's called a unity government with the Palestinian Authority. And then comes all sort of conflict between both. The security apparatus remained under the control of Fatah, the old political party, and Hamas did not like that. Hamas established a shadow security apparatus in Gaza, the executive force, or Quwat Tanfidiyya, and these shadow apparatus start running their own sort of business in Gaza. Now, Hamas' version of the story of what yet to come is that the Palestinian Authority, with the help of the Americans, were planning a coup against Hamas, and it led to Hamas responding by a coup themselves and controlling Gaza. Fatah version of the story that Hamas just ran this coup. I think where more like historically accurate view on it is that Hamas wasn't, they won the election, they were in that position, they did not control Gaza as what they wanted to, and Palestine as they wanted to completely have total authority over the security apparatus, and thus they had issued that they have started a coup. They've attacked the Palestinian Authority, killed hundreds of their soldiers, etc. But another interesting element of it that one has to understand, that they were able also partially to completely control the Gaza Strip for two reasons. The one, first, is that the Palestinian Authority did not want to fight back. Abbas genuinely didn't want to see a civil war in Gaza. That's something that one has to give credit to. So he said, don't shoot back. And the second thing is because the Palestinian Authority and their security apparatus has been already weakened by the Second Intifada. In the Second Intifada, the Israelis have bombarded all the police stations and the power in Gaza of the Palestinian Authority. At the time when Hamas as guerrilla fighters kept fighting against the Israelis and thus gained a lot of military capabilities. And thus, when the clash happened, Hamas was superior and were able to finish the job really quickly. Established their own regime in Gaza, which, by the way, was very, very much authoritarian. But it used both soft authoritarianism and hardcore authoritarianism. And thus people usually confuse it to be less than authoritarian than Ramallah. But that's not true. It's much more authoritarian. Matter of fact, even if you look at like democracy indication, like VDEM, Gaza under Hamas is rated way lower than the West Bank, despite that both are authoritarian.
But do you think that this makes it unrealistic that both these two parties would be willing to come to the table and have a real, integrity and transparent election? Do you think that's realistic to think of in the future, of course?
I think in the short term, unfortunately, it's unrealistic, not because of that only, but because of political interest and because there's also geopolitical regional players, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and others. But I do think that the war in Gaza ultimately will force Hamas to make concessions. Let's be honest. Hamas took us to where we are. And let's be honest. Hamas claims that they won. They claim that whatever, they are weak in Gaza. They have been weakened even harder than that. And even if the war ends tomorrow, but the siege does not end in Gaza, if Israel doesn't finish up Hamas in Gaza, which seems like they are failing to do, the Palestinian people will revolt against Hamas in Gaza, because they will see them as the reason of this disaster on the one hand. On the second hand, they will see that they are failing to produce anything in the future. Now, during the time of war, we're very emotional. That's how human nature works. We're supportive of our group. That's totally legit. But on the long term, they start seeing the problems. Thus, Hamas's only way out is to call on the Palestinian Authority and the PLO to have some sort of concession toward them. And the problem, though, that Abbas is quite stubborn, is not a person who is willing to compromise easily. And it will be a lot of back and forth between both to come to any sort of concession that both can meet.
So what do you think is behind the U.S. building a port in Gaza? What do you think is behind that?
Again, can you repeat it?
What do you think of the U.S. What do you think of the U.S. building a port in Gaza, a seaport? What do you think is behind that?
Obviously, it's a virtue signaling for their voters that we are helping the starved peoples and the situation in Gaza by building a seaport, because Israel has imposed famine on Gaza. It's a man-made famine because they refused to open the borders, etc. So they wanted a way to go around it. So it's, in a way, it's to try to show that we care about the Palestinians. But on the other hand, it's also to absolve Israel from its historical and legal responsibility as occupying power of Gaza, to allow food and water and resources to get into Gaza. So it's a way to find that, hey, we care about the Palestinians on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's like, well, but we will not, push Israel or impose any conditions on Israel to allow for the humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. Now, there's all these theories I've read on the internet, like, oh, it's because of the gas, or the Americans tried to build military base in Gaza. I don't think these are true. I think it is genuinely a port to bring humanitarian aid in Gaza. Does this mean this is positive? I don't think it's positive. I think it's absolving the occupation from their responsibility. That's bad, and Americans are wrong to do that. And the second thing that we have to understand, it's ridiculous that they are trying to go around the Israelis, but at the same time, they already taken a permission from the Israelis to protect the port. So literally, the Israeli forces are around the port and around that area to protect it. So what's the freaking point of the entire thing? Why you're building it? The only explanation, it's a long-term thing. It's not a short-term. It's not being built for the next 2 or 3 months, by the way. It's being built for the next few years that Israeli forces will remain there, and this will be the access for food and aid as military occupation continues. And that's a scary scenario.
And what do you think of the ICJ ruling and the most recent UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire?
I think they're both positive. I think the ICJ suggestions provision is very, very important, very positive. The fact that within 2 weeks or was few weeks of looking into the case, the ICJ has found that it is possible genocide. It's already hitting certain threshold. It's already too much. I hope to see more decisions taken in this regard. As regard to the Security Council, the problem with this always is that there is no mechanism enforcing it. I mean, again, the rule itself, it says that we need a ceasefire on Ramadan. Ramadan is about, we are the last 10 days, right? Ramadan is almost over, and we're not seeing any real change on the ground or any signs towards ceasefire.
Lastly, how do you realistically see this war in Gaza ending?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's hard to predict, to be honest. Everyone is trying to make prediction, but the sad part is that 16% of Gaza is already annexed by Israel as buffer zone around Gaza. So Gaza Strip is 16% smaller. These are buffer zones that will continue. That's no-go zones. On the other hand, there are already military bases that have been established inside Gaza that separate the north from the south. The unfortunate reality that we are talking about most likely a long-term occupation of Gaza. Now, we don't mean occupation in the sense that the Israeli military want to control the civilian life there. They want to control it in the security sense, like in the West Bank, but obviously they are not interested in paying the price of the occupation, meaning manage governance issues, sewage, food, medicine, etc. No, they want a free mass occupation, as Israel wanted all their life. This is the one scenario. Israel continues, and then some sort of government, no matter what this government would be, will manages the civilian lives, but they will continue the military occupation around it, just like in the West Bank. The other scenario is that they reach a deal and withdraw completely from Gaza. But this is unlikely. I don't think that Israel will reach a deal and withdraw completely from it. I mean, there is another scenario that everyone talks about, is that the return of the Palestinian Authority with Arab forces to maintain law and order. But the Arabs and the Palestinian Authority have made it clear that their only condition under which they would be able to return if there is clear path toward ending the occupation and establishing a two-state solution. Something that Israel has refused and doesn't seem clear. But yeah, we'll end maybe on a pessimistic note, because that's the situation as a pessimist. The most likely scenario is that we are talking about long-term occupation of Gaza. And I don't think that the conflict, in terms of guerrilla fighters, whatever, will end soon. It will be back and forth between the two sides.
All right. Thank you so much, Khalil, for your time. Thank you so much for joining Tahrir Podcast.
Thank you, Abdullah.
Of course.